Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Housing and Support Services Work Group, a work group of the Community Services Coordinating Body of St. Clair County. We welcome you to this dynamic summit that we're putting on this morning. We have almost 200 attendees, and so we are really thrilled to have everybody joining us this morning. I want to give you just a quick rundown of our agenda for this morning. We have our keynote speaker, Dr. Matthew Desmond, who is the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. We're so happy to have him kicking this off for all of us. Then at about 9:30, we're going to be sharing information in a PowerPoint format on what our community data says about housing in our community and the kind of things that we're doing to resolve that issue. We're also going to be having before Dr. Desmond talks, a short questionnaire for all of the participants. So get ready to answer a few questions that we have for you. Then after the PowerPoint, we have a video of individuals here in our community that have experienced housing issues, homelessness, and eviction. And we are going to wrap up our event with a community panel of local movers and shakers, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get to that point. This housing summit is possible because of contributions from a number of community members that we want to thank for their sponsorships at this time. The keynote sponsor is St. Clair County Community Mental Health. The diamond sponsor is Beacon Wealth Group. Gold sponsors are Blue Water Developmental Housing, Innovative Housing, Michigan Works, Semco Energy, Southeast Michigan Nonprofit Housing Corp, Port Huron Odyssey House, and Ennis Center for Children. And then we have silver sponsorships from Sanborn Gratiot Memorial Home, Blue Water Residential Nonprofit Housing Corp, and Professional Counseling Center. Thank you for supporting us in this way. During this summit, please enter any comments or questions into the chat. And if you have questions, we will attempt to answer those as we move through the seminar. Right now, at this point, I am going to now move into questions that we have, a poll that we're going to do with everybody participating. And Melinda Johnson is going to be leading us in that. Melinda is Executive Director for Blue Water Community Action Agency, who is also our HARA in St. Clair County. So Melinda, if you would like to take the show from here.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, let's see what we got here. We got some feedback, so hang on 1 minute and get that fixed. It's not. Okay. So we're going to start with a poll. There we go. We're going to start with a poll today to gauge how much you know, kind of get some information about who's on the line here watching with us. And so a box is going to pop up on your screen and you're going to select an answer. And after a few minutes, we'll share the results with the group. So the first question is, have you ever been evicted or do you know someone who has been? How are we doing, everybody? All right, we're going to just give you about 5 more seconds. All right, so what have we got? So 65% of us online here have been evicted or know somebody who has. So we've got some experience watching today. All right, let's go to the next question. Next question is we want to know if you think there's an affordable housing shortage in St. Clair County. Yes, no, or you're not sure. All right. We're waiting. I feel like we need one of those clocks. Tick, tick, you know, I can't do the sound. What was that one? The Jeopardy sound. Yeah, that would be fun. Whoa, 92% say yes, there's an affordable housing shortage in St. Clair County. Question number 3, multiple choice. What is the number 1 factor contributing to homelessness? What do you think? There's multiple choices there. Joblessness, medical debt, work injury, domestic violence, divorce, substance use or mental illness, or unplanned crises. What's your choice for the number 1 factor? Oh, I'm being told people are changing answers. You're thinking this out here. Okay, here we go. So 15% are at joblessness. We got 2% at medical debt. Work injury is at 1%. 2%, I'm writing these down as I'm telling you. Divorce is 2%, 41% for mental illness or substance use, and unplanned crises is 37%. 4th question, how much of your income should be spent on rental housing? What is the percentage? 15%, 30%, 45%, or 60%? Make your choice. So what have you got? I'm being told there's a lot of smart people on this webinar today. 81% picked 30%. You're going to get answers to some of these later, just so you know. We're not going to leave you hanging. All right. Question number 5. How many of St. Clair County's school-aged children were homeless in 2021? 100 or less, 100 to 200, 200 to 300, or more than 300? Okay, Sarah, what have we got for answers here? All right, 53% are saying 100 to 200. We'll give you the answer later in the PowerPoint. Last question is now coming up. In joining this webinar today, are you joining as a person with lived experience with homelessness, a representative of a service provider, a representative of a local business, from local government, or a concerned citizen? Make your choice. All right, Sarah, are we almost done? Yeah. All right, Sarah's going to give us the totals. All right, most of us are service providers and local businesses, concerned citizens. Awesome.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for participating in our Housing Summit today. I'm Amy Smith. I'm Assistant Division Director for Community Planning here at St. Clair County Community Mental Health, and I'm also the coordinator for our Housing and Support Services Work Group.
I'm Melinda Johnson. I'm the Executive Director at Blue Water Community Action, and we are the Housing Assessment Resource Agency, the HARA for St. Clair County, overseeing a lot of services related to homelessness. So we're going to start this PowerPoint and go through it. Amy's going to kick it off, and we're going to just both of us disappear, so we just focus on our PowerPoint.
Would like to encourage you, though, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. and we have a moderator who is monitoring that for us. So let's go ahead and get started. I just got to get caught up here a moment. Okay, here we go. So I think we all can agree, whether we're at the federal level, the state level, or local level, that we need to address some key points when we're talking about housing and homelessness. The first one is that it involves partnership at all levels of the community. There's not one agency, organization, or group that can solve this issue. Listening to Dr. Desmond, again, it kind of confirmed that it is a full community that needs to work together to make any changes occur. Also, that keeping people housed is an investment in our community. We want to make sure that we break the cycle of homelessness, of shelter, bouncing from shelters to shelters, that we want to help support and make our community healthier by making sure everyone has a home to call their own. We also know that it's true that many people are just one paycheck away from homelessness. So Kathy kind of originally said this is the Housing and Support Service Work Group is part of the Community Services Coordinating Body. For those who may not know, the Community Services Coordinating Body is a group of over 70 different agencies, organizations, and individuals who work on large-scale issues in our community. And because there's no one agency or organization, like I said, that can deal with housing, we have a standing work group called the Housing and Support Services Work Group underneath the CSCB. The purpose of our work group is really to address housing and support needs for individuals and families along the continuum of care from homeless to permanent housing. So any issues that occur along that spectrum. Our vision also is that individuals and families who are homeless or at risk of homelessness in our county will have access to safe, decent, affordable housing and the resources necessary to help keep them in that. So that's our mission and our vision, and we have had that same, those same goals for many, many years. What are the things that we work on? Well, throughout the work group, we work on our annual point in time count, which I will talk about in a moment. We sponsor our community resource fair, which is a one-stop, one-shop event that happens in conjunction with the St. Clair County Community College, SC4. It's hosted there, and vendors come and have all different kinds of information so that people who are at risk of homeless or are homeless know what supports are out there, and we make those connections. We sponsor Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week, which happens to be occurring this week, and Pathway Shelter and the Harbor both have activities that are going on at their shelters to help people become aware of what that is like. We are the local planning body for our county, and I will talk about that in just a moment also. We oversee the emergency solutions grant that come from MSHDA, Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and we are responsible then for not only allocating those funds for our county, but then also overseeing the shelters and making sure those funds are being spent correctly. We do as much community education and awareness as possible because we want to break the stigma that is often associated with homelessness. And that's part of what we're doing today is with this summit. We are the county liaison for Michigan State Housing Development Authority, MSHDA. So the things that the state requires us to do comes through our work group, and we are then responsible for being a part of that whole plan. We collaborate with other county and state stakeholders. Again, we don't operate in a vacuum. We need to be working together. And then we also support local grant applications when it fits with what the Housing and Support Services Work Group is actually working on. Our goal really is to address prevention. We want to prevent people from becoming homeless. We want to provide quality, affordable rental housing and affordable owner-occupied housing when it is appropriate.
So there are lots of factors that affect homelessness. We took a little quiz earlier, and we're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. But there are lots of things that impact homelessness. This chart is talking about different types of income that we look at. And I want to start by talking, before we talk about affordable housing, talking about income. This chart is a very simplistic look at living wages versus poverty wages versus minimum wage. And there's, we're going to look first at the federal poverty level. That formula is based on a 1960s formula that calculated and still does the minimum cost to feed a family of 4, a nutritionally adequate diet, and then they multiplied that amount by 3, because back in the 1960s, food accounted for 30% of a family's income. But guess what? Food doesn't account for 30% of our income anymore. For the average family, it accounts for less than 10% of the income. So things have changed a lot since the 1960s. However, the federal poverty level is used to determine eligibility for a wide variety of government assistance programs. And they use a percentage of the federal poverty level. Sometimes you'll see it in writing as the FPL, federal poverty level. So for example, at Blue Water Community Action, the Head Start program, eligibility for that is based on 100% of the federal poverty level. And we have some that go up to 130% based on family size for some slots as well. In the schools, free lunch is based on 130% or less of the poverty level, and reduced lunch is at 185%. So what does that mean for a family of 4? So in 2022, that means 100% of poverty would be $27,750 or less. So that would get you into Head Start if you had a young child, or other federal, government programs as well. 130%, so for free lunch and breakfast at schools, the family income would have to be at $36,075 or less. And for a reduced lunch, it would be $51,338 for a family of 4. To meet the actual basic needs, families need to earn about 2 times as much as the federal poverty level. Families below 200% of poverty are still considered to be low income. Extreme poverty is considered to be at the 100% or lower level. Then there's something called a living wage. It's based on a community's cost of living and includes consideration of all of these things highlighted in orange. It includes food and transportation, medical expenses, housing, childcare. It includes utilities. And we've also learned, especially since the pandemic has happened, how critical it is to have cell phone and internet access. So typically it's 3 to 4 times the poverty level to actually have a living wage. So if you look at our chart, a single mom with 2 kids would need to make $44.97 an hour in St. Clair County. Even finding jobs at 2 times poverty or $21.12 an hour is tough to find, let alone which would just barely cover minimum expenses, let alone a job at $44.97. So we often see families who are working multiple jobs because they aren't earning those wages, and so they have to make it up by working more hours. These are all based on working 40 hours a week. We've also had a decrease in affordable housing in St. Clair County. This particular chart shows that we've really had from 2010 to 2020, a big increase in the median price of homes. And you can see that there's been an increase in rent by the number of bedrooms as well. We don't yet have numbers related to what's happening now, but what we're seeing in 2022 anecdotally is that rents are going up even faster than they did in the 10 years between 2010 and 2020. So if you answered yes, that we have an affordable housing shortage, and question number 2, and 92% of you did, you are correct. We have an affordable housing shortage in St. Clair County. 30% of income is the amount that's used to determine if housing is affordable for each individual family. So that was in question 4, how much of household income should be spent on housing rental? We got a smart bunch here online today because 81% of you did say that that was the amount. Now, if you can see all the way to the bottom, depends on where your bar is, and may or may not, but in St. Clair County in 2020, 51.7% of those who rented were paying more than 30% of their income for housing. So they were very cost burdened. More importantly, of the total folks renting in St. Clair County, almost 25% were severely burdened or paying more than 50% of their income for housing. And that doesn't include their utility costs or anything else. That's just their rent costs that they're paying. So remember, the goal is to be at 30% of income or less. So it'll be interesting in 2025 when we get that data to see what impact the pandemic had on those incomes, because as we know, rent seems to be going up faster than our incomes are going up. We've also had a decrease in the city of Port Huron in the number of rental properties, although we do have new owner-occupied homes increasing. For those who are wondering, we have about 12,500 housing units in St. Clair County, and almost half of those are registered as rentals. And there's an additional 400 that are unregistered that have folks living in them, but it's not the owner who's living there. For those of you who didn't know, cost of renting is usually higher than home ownership. Plus, home ownership creates wealth and is an asset for you. For many, the ability to make a down payment and or the ability to maintain and sustain a home through repairs and that type of thing is what prevents them from getting a home. Most people who rent have excellent payment records, and they are paying more than what they would be paying if they were a homeowner. So one of the things that Dr. Desmond talked about was whether, one of the things we could be doing is offering more on down payment assistance, and then that year of support maybe afterwards that could help people make sure that they create that savings account and methods so that they can make sure that they keep their home in repair. But that would then create wealth for those folks. And instead, we just, they just are paying out the higher amounts in rent. We have some policies and zoning issues in Port Huron. We had a moratorium, or we have a moratorium on new rental properties within St. Clair County. So it's on rental properties that are in the R zones. So zoning was something that was talked about. Zones determine what type of things, housing or businesses, can be in particular parts of the city. And we have a moratorium in the city of Port Huron on new rental properties. And we don't expect that to be changed. The purpose was to emphasize owner-occupied dwellings and to prevent further increases in the number of rental units. And so that was part of the city's housing initiative starting in 2010, and that has not changed. Specifically, here we go. Ordinance number 10-151, chapter 10, article 5 says that because of the general health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. They want to have a housing that is safe for everybody who's living in them. And this particular ordinance was established to tackle properties that are rented to family members, friends, or acquaintances of the owner. There's about 400 of those that are not registered in the city of Port Huron, and they're looking to get those last 400 registered. There's lots of additional barriers that to create issues for people who are renting and home ownership as well. Childcare costs or childcare costs are pretty high for the most part. In the last few years, we've had a significant decrease in the number of licensed childcare providers that have closed, both centers and in-home providers. About 28%, or approximately 900 of slots in centers, are operated by private and faith-based providers. And the remainder of the center-based slots, or about 2,300, are operated by school districts for the Great Start Readiness Program, preschool program, latchkey, and childcare, and by Blue Water Community Action, who provides Head Start, Early Head Start, and the Great Start Readiness Program. In-home slots in 2009, so we're going back about 13 years, there were 1,268 slots. In 2020, that number was only 291 slots, a decrease of 77% of in-home childcare slots. Those are critical because although we have lots of the center-based slots through school districts and others, most of them do not provide for that critical age of newborn to age 3. And so in-home providers have been the ones who've provided those slots for many, many years, and they have just been just eliminated in the last few years. For those of you who don't know, the typical cost for an infant in St. Clair County is about $788 a month, and for preschool, it's $597 a month. So getting childcare that is affordable, that we have enough of, and that's high quality is very important in St. Clair County. We have lots of folks who might be interested in working if they were able to find the kind of childcare that they're looking for. The other issue with childcare is it's not always available for the timing that parents are looking for. So trying to get second or third shift childcare is especially difficult. In transportation, we have a great mass transit program or agency, Blue Water Mass Transit in St. Clair County, but it is limited to specific areas of the county, and it only runs for limited hours. And it doesn't always work for those who are working second shift, third shift, or on Sundays, it doesn't run at all. So it does limit for people who don't have access to a car or other transportation in where they can live. Dr. Desmond talked about some case management and that it doesn't have to be long-term, that typically if we can help folks for short-term and get them all settled so they know how to take care of things, that they will be successful, whether it's renting or frankly, home ownership as well. New homeowners have a lot of things to learn when they first get a new house. I remember when I got my house and all the things that I had to learn to take care of it. So case management funding would be really helpful if we could provide that to folks to make sure that they're going to be successful. Crisis mode is something that happens when you have multiple things that pile up. And we especially see this with people who are, have low income. When you're at risk of losing your housing, which can happen for a multitude of reasons, it's really difficult to focus on day-to-day tasks. You know, your car breaks down, how are you going to get to work? How are you going to get to your appointments? Sometimes we don't even remember that we've got them because we've got to take care of other things. If we have to switch from a car to a bus, then we have an issue with how long it takes us to get from one place to the other. A couple other things that contribute to this crisis mode and things that are additional barriers to success are eviction without legal supports. Dr. Desmond's book, Evicted, indicates that when we have legal support for people who are in the eviction process, 80% of those cases can be resolved without an eviction. That's a significant number of people who end up being able to maintain their housing or at least not get an eviction on their record, which is extremely helpful for getting the next house. Once you get an eviction on your record, basically they call it the slippery slope, because then you go to probably an area and or a landlord that is not as good as the one you just left. You get another one, it just keeps creating a slope of moving into lesser and lesser desirable neighborhoods. And so that's one of the things that we want to avoid as well.
Melinda had given us some great information. And now what I'd like to do is kind of focus a little bit more on some of the things that we previously mentioned. For starters, we're going to talk about the point in time count. What is a PIT count? PIT count is, it's completed statewide throughout the state of Michigan the last week of January. This is a MSHDA requirement as well as a HUD requirement. And in St. Clair County, our Housing and Support Services Work Group holds the PIT count the last Wednesday in January. So, and it is a 24-hour count. So from midnight on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, all the way through to 11:59 Wednesday evening. So what does it include? It includes counting all of the individuals and families in our St. Clair County shelters. It also includes an unsheltered count, looking for individuals and families who are living out in the elements, living in the parks, living in uninhabitable residents who might be in tents, wherever they may be. So we create a team that goes out and looks for these individuals and have conversations with them. We also coordinate with our organizations, our human service organizations, and our law enforcement, that anyone that they encounter on that Wednesday, to ask two simple questions. Where did you sleep last night? Again, because it would be Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. And where do you sleep tonight? So here is some data about our local shelter count. So these are people who are in the shelter. So I start back with 2012 up to 2022. And each year it's different because, again, our housing population, they are transient, they move around, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few moments. But these are people who are actually in our shelters. A couple things that I want to point out to you are the numbers kind of vary, but from 2020 down to like 2024, you know, we have roughly about 80 to 90 people in the shelter on this particular day. If it's a warm January, which doesn't necessarily always happen, then we may, you know, not have as many people in. Or if it's very, very cold, people find places to hunker down. So again, this is a 1 point in time day count. The other thing that I really want to highlight, though, is the number of children. We don't often think, when we're talking about homelessness, about the children and the number of children who are affected. So you can see in the chart the number of children that on that particular day are actually homeless. The other point that I want to point out is we did our count in 2020 in January. February, March was the start of COVID. Shelters basically had to shut down. They had to drop their residency by more than half. And that's why you'll see the decrease in numbers for 2021 and 2022. Okay. Now let's talk about unsheltered. Unsheltered, again, the kind of known as the street count. We have teams that go out and look for people that may be homeless and living wherever. They might be going to Mid-City Nutrition during lunch and dinner and ask those type of ask the individuals who are there if they're homeless. We work with Department of Human Services, Community Mental Health, Proto Hopes, all kinds of agencies and organizations underneath the CSCB umbrella, asking them to help with this count. So you will see our typical numbers that in 2019, we had our polar vortex and we only had 34 people, but the weather was sub-zero. And we had people that we had hunkered down at the center of Port Huron, and we provided them shelter for the 2 days as well as food for them. We had a makeshift shelter. 2020, we have 162 people. And this was, again, before COVID actually hit. But what we did is we partnered with Harbor Impact Ministries, and they had an impact day. So a lot of the individuals that they service came into Harbor Impact, and that is what made our numbers jump. We have people in our community who are homeless. They're families, they're individuals, there's children, and oftentimes we choose not to see them, but they are out there. The other point that I wanted to make was that from 2012 to 2018, we had an average of 81 people per year who were homeless that we identified on that day. 15 of them were families and 22 children. Again, that's just an average, and that was pre-COVID. 2021, for those who are very astute, we did not count because we were in the lockdown, and NYSHTA did not want us to do any kind of street outreach at that time. So we do not have any 21 data. So, okay. So what shelters do we have? Okay, for those who may not be familiar with our shelter system, we had Blue Water Area Rescue Mission, or what we call BWARM. This shelter was opened in 2018. It housed single men. So you had 18 or older, and if you were a single male, you could go there. If you had children, then oftentimes we would look for other resources, or we would put the children someplace, or a hotel room or something like that. Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, DRMM, Pathway Shelter, back in 2017, Blue Water Safe Horizons had managed that organization, and then they chose no longer to be involved with homelessness. They wanted to go back to their true mission of serving people, victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So Detroit Rescue Mission overtook the running of Pathways. We dropped it in size and focused on women and single women and women with children. And then we have our comprehensive youth services, the Harbor. It's a runaway and homeless youth shelter serving children 10 to 16. Okay, so you can see through the years how many people we actually had in those facilities. Once COVID hit, again, I want to remind you that the shelters were required to reduce their size at least by half. Some of it with COVID protocol was greater than that. BWARM ended up closing in 2021, and currently we do not have a single men's shelter. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Detroit Rescue Mission, our Pathway Shelter, serving women and children, that number also had to be reduced. But again, you can see how many adults and how many children that are served. It's over half our children that are with their single parent. And this data, I want to say, comes from our state database. It's called the Homeless Management Information System. So all of our organizations are required to put this information into the database, and it's live. And so those are current numbers that are out there. Couple other caveats that I want to throw out there is Safe Horizons is not listed here because they do not enter data into the HMIS system, the HIMA system. They have a different data system that they use. And again, it's to keep the confidentiality of victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, make sure that that is protected. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's often a myth that we hear working in this field that the services in St. Clair County are so wonderful and so plentiful that people who are homeless, come here to get those services. Again, that is a myth, okay? We have no greater services than anybody else out there in the state. What we do is we communicate, we coordinate, we network, we try and help people the best that we can. We try to be very resourceful with our funds, but the truth of the matter is people who are homeless are transient. They do move, and they move for a wide variety of reasons, not just because the grass is greener in St. Clair County, but people move because they are trying to flee their predators or their perpetrators. They're running from domestic violence situations or sexual assault situations. They may have had a substance use issue, become clean, and so they want to start someplace new so they don't relapse. They may have exited the correctional system and completed probation and parole, and so they need to start someplace new where they have a chance. They may have family here in the Blue Water area, and so they're moving closer to take care of an aging parent. And then when the aging parent dies, then they're stuck. So there's a wide variety of reasons why people are homeless and or move here. There's no one particular reason. Okay, so who is at risk of homelessness and what is the definition of homelessness? Okay. Any individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. What does that mean? That is private or public, not designed for ordinary use as a regular sleeping accommodations for human beings, including such as cars, parks, abandoned buildings, bus or train stations, airports, campgrounds, etc. Okay. Also, individuals and families who are with the support of some other organization or charity are in a shelter situation or are staying in a hotel or motel or some other type of governmental program for low income. Another caveat for this is individuals who are exiting an institution where they have resided for 90 days, but they were also homeless prior to that. Category 2 is individuals and families who are imminently losing their primary night residence. These are people who are being evicted. They have no place else to go. They have no family or friends or other support network that can help them secure permanent housing. A third category is people fleeing or is attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against individuals and or family members. They have no other place to go, and again, no other support network that can help them find secure permanent housing. So HUD considers those homeless, but who's at risk of homeless? Risk of homelessness are actually individuals and families that have an annual income below 30% of the median. In St. Clair County, based on the 2020 census, and kind of going back to what Melinda was saying, in St. Clair County, that would be people who were making $59,138 or less. The median income is people who are 50% higher and 50% lower. So 30% of that is $17,741. So anybody who's making that amount of money annually is at risk of homelessness. There are other risk factors. People who have moved two or more times in 60 days, people who are doubled up because they don't have a place of their own and they're staying maybe on couches or sleeping on floors, or multi people in the bedrooms, people who face eviction within 21 days, people who are staying in hotels or motels without financial assistance from any other charity or organization helping to support that. Anyone, again, who is possibly entering an institution and has no place to go, at risk of homelessness. The other caveat that I mentioned is unoccupied children or youth, and families who do not qualify for homeless under the HUD definition, but qualify for homelessness under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act. And this is also the children and the family can qualify for McKinney-Vento program. So what is McKinney-Vento? McKinney-Vento is a HUD-sponsored program through Department of Education. It's for families who lack a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence, kind of those that I have already mentioned. And they also have to have children who are in youth sharing housing with other people, again, because of housing hardships. They're living in motels, campgrounds, cars, wherever, in emergency shelters or transitional housing, and also the unoccupied youth that are not living with biological parents and legal guardians. That's the definition for McKinney-Vento. In St. Clair County, Department of Education sends grant dollars to our RESA, Regional Education Service Agency, out there on Range Road, and they are the coordinators for our county. So then at each school district is required to have a McKinney-Vento liaison, and they work closely with RESA's coordinator to collect data, to support education, to make sure children are getting the things they need so that they don't fall too far behind their grade level, make sure that the family has whatever kind of case management and supports that are needed. So they work hand-on with these children, with these families, to support them and hopefully help them get into more permanent supportive housing.
So before we move on, I'm going to answer a few questions that people have put in the chat. One of them is, are foster kids or young adults leaving that program considered to be imminently losing their housing? And in some cases they are. So it just depends on whether they meet the definitions that Amy just shared with you or not. Most of the time in our county, the foster care system does work to try and get permanent housing for the kids that are leaving that program so that they don't end up homeless. But statistically nationwide, if you've been in foster care, you're statistically more likely to become homeless than our young people who have not been in foster care. Another question was, are new rental buildings considered new construction or conversion from single family or both? And it really is dependent upon whatever municipality they're in and how they would define those types of things. So that would be something that would be defined by the municipality. The question is, why do we only have 2 shelters open? And we're going to get to that in just a minute. And we also have a little bit of data on how many families are put in the hotels. And I can tell you in our community, about 25% of households that we're putting into hotels are families. So there's at least one child with that. But we'll have a little bit of information on that in a few minutes. So this slide is talking about the impact of COVID on homelessness. And we saw a lot of things happen during the pandemic, and we continue to see those things happen. One of the first things that Amy already talked about is that the shelters had to decrease capacity for safety reasons, which resulted in fewer beds. So for example, if we had a room that had 6 beds in it, oftentimes it could be shared by 6 single women or some combination up to 6. But when we went with, once the pandemic started, we weren't able to do that anymore. We wanted to only keep one person in that room, regardless of the number of beds that were available. So Pathway Shelter went from 20 beds total to 1 person or 1 family per room, which significantly reduced our ability to serve folks. Safe Horizons did the same thing. They went from 20 beds to 1 individual or family per room. And Be Warm, because they had a dormitory situation, they went from 40 down to less than 15 so that they could keep people spread out enough to meet the minimum 6-foot distance that we wanted to have. So that led to a significant reduction in the ability to service folks who were homeless. What then happened is we almost, within days of shutting things down back in that mid-March, started seeing people who had been homeless for a very long time. They were the ones who were really used to it. Rarely see them show up for services, but they no longer had access to fast food restaurants, for access to bathrooms. There was no access to pop cans at the Speedway and gas stations that they could return, because all the return places at the various grocery stores had shut down. So what we saw is people started coming out, and that happened in about 2 weeks, within 2 weeks after the pandemic shut everything down. So Blue Water Community Action was able to divert some funding from April of 2020 through September of 2020 to provide emergency shelter in a local hotel. And during that time, they served a total of 27 people, 23 households, and 3 children included in that. It cost about $76,000 to provide shelter to those folks during that period. Water was another issue. We wanted to make sure that people had access to water. So that was something I forgot to mention earlier. The other thing is that many of the agencies that typically provide services to folks, it took a minute to pivot to virtual. And so it was very important that when we opened up that shelter, that we provided case management on site. And at the beginning, we had somebody on site in the hotel 24 hours a day. And then we quickly moved to just during the daytime. And then as it progressed, we were able to just have them come on site as needed so that people could get services there. And it didn't take too long when we were able to have others come on site as well and provide services during that first part of the pandemic. Lots of money was, and we still have some left, was allocated to assist with homelessness. Amy mentioned the Emergency Solutions Grant. We had a special grant. It's called the Emergency Solutions Grant, COVID, ESGCV. And we had over $600,000 for that. And we were able to assist 74 households with emergency shelter and housing. We had 2 rounds of SARA funding, and that SARA funding just ended in the last month or so. And we provided over $6 million in assistance to folks who were facing eviction. And what was really great about that program as well as another one that we had. Actually, we had a couple others. Let's see here. We had the Coronavirus Cares funding, and we had eviction moratorium funding, eviction diversion funding, well over $7 million that we were able to spend out assisting people with their rent, and in some cases mortgage assistance. That was able to keep them in their houses. It basically eliminated the need for people to be moving, kept them in one place, and it made our landlords whole for the most part for those that were willing to participate in the program so that they didn't lose money either. Because if they had lost funding and hadn't been able to make their mortgage payments, then, then we were going to have two issues. As of December, all of our federal money is going to be gone, basically, and we will have some money starting in January to provide some case management services. But the money that we've had, this huge number of money that we've had to help people avoid eviction is going to be gone. So question number 3 was, what is the number one factor contributing to homelessness? And we gave you a whole bunch of different answers, but the correct and all of those contribute to it. But the real answer is it's poverty. People who are in poverty, people with low income. Remember, we had the slide that most of us are only 1 or 2 paychecks away from becoming homeless ourselves. People who are in poverty are prone to become homeless. And that's the number one factor contributing to homelessness. Bit of a trick question there. Some data just from Blue Water Community Action's HARA program. We've been dealing with tons of phone calls. We often are said, oh, I called and nobody's called me back. Well, this is part of the reason. From January 2021 through September of 2022, we've had over 3,600 phone calls. And they're either for people who are facing eviction or folks who are actually homeless. In October of this year, so we're just halfway through November right now. In October, we had a 50% increase in the number of calls over the previous month. So we don't even have any October numbers on here. This only goes through September. So a 50% increase in calls over the previous month for folks who were facing evictions, and a 75% increase in calls for people who are homeless. So we are definitely facing some issues here with the number of folks that are calling. 211 is the call for help. So lots of folks can call 211. Anybody can call 211 when you're looking for types of services or programs, help. And here's a variety of things that they often provide help for. When you have questions about where do I go if my utility is about to be turned off, I'm about to face eviction, I need somewhere to go because I have this health issue, I don't have enough food. Those types of questions are very common at 211. So just like you can call 911 for help, you can call 211 for a different kind of help. Some interesting statistics on here. In 2022 already, 911 or 211, sorry, has already received almost 4,000 phone calls for just these categories of help. And there's also seen a significant increase. So in 2021, you can see that there were 816 calls for utilities. That was for the whole year. In 2022, they already had, through the end of September, 1,500 phone calls for utilities. That's an 80% increase, which is just huge. So we are looking at some issues related to being able to pay utility bills in our county. The other big issue is in the housing. In 2021, 810 calls. Having all that ceremony, having the funding to divert people from becoming evicted, did reduce our calls down to 810, but just in the 9 months of 2022, we have had a 76% increase and we've had 1,423 calls. Now, couple other little things that are interesting on this chart. In 2021, you will see under food, it says 3.5% of the contacts were for food information and referrals. We had in 2021 a multitude of food distributions going on throughout the county. There was at least one a week and sometimes a couple. And that number has gone down in 2022. And so already at the end of September, we were up to 6% of the phone calls coming into 211 were for food assistance. You will see at the beginning of, or in 2020, food assistance need was at 11.7%. That was before we were able to figure out how to get it together there, and people were having difficulties getting food. The lots of grocery stores have already, are now well versed in being able to make your order online and somebody will deliver it to you. But that took time to get all of that up and going for both private businesses as well as those of us in the social services field to try and get food out. There was some distribution problems and all kinds of things. So there was definitely a need that we can see caused by the pandemic for food supports in 2020. And we were able to resolve that as we moved into 2021. But as that amount of food that's available has gone back down in the food distributions, we do see the number of phone calls going back up. In 2022, the Blue Water Area Rescue Mission closed early this year. So that's the shelter that provided services and housing to single men. And let me see here. Make sure I got my right notes here. So that's caused some issues. Blue Water Community Action, through some of the SARA money and other funds that were made available, has been able to house many of them within local hotels so that we could take care of that issue, especially critical in the winter months. The problem that's coming up, however, is that that money is ending and winter is starting. So there's a group of people that have been working together to, originally it was just to find a permanent solution, but that permanent solution did not come about fast enough. So we're in the process of creating a temporary solution that will be shared in the very near future with our community. And once we get the temporary solution up and running, we will be moving towards making sure that we have a permanent solution beyond this winter. So we do have something coming that will be helping folks, men in particular, during the winter months. And then we will hopefully, before it becomes winter of next year, have our permanent solution up and in place. So right now we have the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries operating Pathway Shelter. The Harbor is helping homeless and runaway youth. Wings of the Harbor has a transitional living program for youth 16 to 21. Blue Water Safe Horizons has 26 beds, and Blue Water Community Action, the funding that we do have through the SARA funds and Emergency Solutions Grant, COVID money will be ending in December, and we will just have $21,000 to get us through the winter and all the way through next September. Right now, we've been spending on average about $25,000 a month without having a men's shelter. So hopefully we will, once the temporary shelter gets in place, we'll be able to stretch those emergency hotel vouchers out into the year. We do want to share that there are organizations that are providing housing for special populations. There's Innovative Housing. Blue Water Habitat for Humanity is a great organization to go through for home ownership. Chippewa Nonprofit Housing Corporation, the Blue Water Residential Nonprofit Housing Corporation, and Sanborn Gratiot Memorial Home which has been helping with some solutions for seniors that are homeless, has been the, and Sanborn has 4 beds, is my understanding. And Port Huron Housing Commission also has a home that they have, we're using right now also for seniors that are homeless.
Okay, going back to a couple questions on the chat that came in about came in about the McKinney-Vento. Can you further explain how the funding works for supporting kids through RISA and schools? Do kids' families have to reach out at first? It is my understanding that McKinney-Vento is really a coordinated effort between the school and RISA as well as the shelters. So if a family is in a shelter or in a hotel, then what they will do is the coordinator, Laura McDowell from RISA, she will connect with those families, make sure that they have the educational material that they need, help set them up or provide tutoring with them. She will also, if the family is moving, she will help also get them connected with the new school district and enrolled in it that way. I'm not sure about dollar amounts and how the rest of that works, but I know she is involved in all 7 school districts in our county. She also has cut statistics. So at the state, we get the percentages, but Laura's the one who gives the number of children that she's involved with. So if you look at 2018-19, she was involved with 551 children. And 1920 was 533. That still is a huge amount of children who are at risk of homeless or are homeless. 2021, again, COVID, a lot of families were, there was no school. They were being in-home virtual kind of connectivity. But then you can see, again, how that number has jumped to 406 this last school year. So this is the breakdown of how she sees these families or how she works with them. The connection was, I mean, any way a school identifies a family, whether it's the family comes forward and the mom talks to the school counselor and says, hey, we need help. Or if a teacher recognizes and identifies signs that there might be some issues, their child might be super hungry or wearing stinky clothes or looks disheveled and not well rested and ready to learn that day. It could be a bus driver who starts to pick up children in different locations. So it doesn't matter who identifies this family might be struggling. The McKinney-Vento liaison in that school district can help provide supports and services. Next question is, how do you find the homeless liaison in a particular school district? What I would suggest is either call your school district or connect with Laura McDowell at St. Clair County RISA, and she will be able to provide you more of that information.
I also got a question, Amy. Where can we find updates about the temporary shelter? So that information will get sent out to the members of Community Services Collaborative Bodies. So if you're an organization that's not a member, you might want to consider joining us. We're a great group of people. Also, I'm sure that it'll be in the news and we'll put it out. It's really going to depend on the processes and everything. All of that stuff still has to be put together. We do have a goal of having it up and running by December or at some point in December. But at this point, that's all I can share with you. You can also, the HARA will put out the information and Blue Water Community Action will probably post it on our Facebook page.
We just received word that Jennifer Allen is the homeless liaison for Port Huron School District. So thank you, Jennifer, for putting that in the chat. Okay, so getting back up. Yeah, here we go. I just want to make a quick switch to talking about, housing and homelessness and the impacts on our community. There's no real, other than shelter count, there's no real accurate way to count or to see individuals unless we start looking for them. So when I was talking to our community partners and making an outreach, trying to decide what kind of data do you have that can help paint the picture, because not everybody is in the shelters. Contacted McLaren Port Huron. And we know that people who are homeless oftentimes don't have primary care physicians or don't go to the clinics or may have difficulty following through with tests or getting test results. So consequently, their health declines and they ended up in our emergency departments. So you can see with McLaren from fiscal year 1920, they had 126 unduplicated individuals go into their ED 399 times. For fiscal year 2021, it was 106 individuals, 425 times. And then this recent fiscal year, 125 individuals for 427. That's almost 4 times visit per year per individual. What about our law enforcement? Law enforcement, our Port Huron PD, they had in the calendar year 2021, 523 encounters. Now they could have just been, hey, can I help you? What's going on? But again, this was COVID. So people were supposed to be hunkered down. 2022, they had 444 encounters. Again, is that the best use of our law enforcement's time? Just posing a question. Our nights at the intervention center, sheriff's department, it roughly costs $60 a night to stay there. And annually, about 2.4% of all of their residents are homeless. So in 2022, it's 77 individuals. In 21, it was 81. And in this year, up until last week, when I had Sheriff King in a meeting with me, it was 73 individuals that are actually, once they are released from the intervention center, have no place to go. St. Clair County Community Mental Health, we have a mobile crisis unit. Our mobile crisis unit serves individuals who are not clients or consumers of community mental health, but are identified out in the community as having some type of a mental health crisis. So last fiscal year, 122 of those screenings were people who were experiencing homelessness. And through August of this year, we had 88 screenings of people who were homeless. Disability Network of Southeastern Michigan has a grant where they work specifically with homeless veterans and their households and to help get them housed and provide case management so that they don't lose their house. In 2022 or in 2020, you can see they had helped 23 people, 17 were veterans, 21, 15. And then in 2022, up through September, again, calendar year, they had 9 veteran households that they were able to assist. AHARA, Melinda's talked about some of the many different calls. When people get to the point where they can actually do screenings with them, which are quite detailed and have to collect a lot of information, you can see 86 in last calendar year, 31 were kids. I want to highlight the kids again. In 2022, up through September, 109 households. So even that number jumped, and 64 adults and 45 children. Community First Health Centers has a homeless healthcare project where they will go into the soup kitchen, to the shelters, to help provide medical support, screenings for individuals who are homeless. And again, you can see the numbers of people that they have served in St. Clair County. And last year, 214 individuals. And then this past fiscal year, 230. St. Clair County Community Mental Health, we've estimated that 4% of our individuals that come in for intake are homeless. And so that's 134 people last fiscal year. This past fiscal year, we had 147 who actually identify themselves as homeless. But we also have a program called Assertive Community Treatment, our ACT team. ACT team is the people who are in that program tend to be more persistent and chronically mentally ill. And so homelessness is a big issue for them. And our staff go out and meet with these people daily, every other day, make sure they can continue to take their meds. And you can see the extent that homelessness has on that population. So threw a lot of information out to you, and thank you for your patience. But how does homelessness affect our community? It creates social barriers. You know, it's a they, a them. We don't know that homeless is out there unless we look for them, unless we work with them, unless it affects our family, unless, you know, we see them when we go to Sam's or to Kroger or to Kmart or wherever they may be. It shapes our next generation. This is why McKinney-Vento is so important. When we have children who are homeless, they're not getting the nutrients that they need in a proper diet. They're not getting the rest, you know, especially if they're infants. We know that our brain develops the most between the age of birth and 6 years old. So if families are struggling with housing and homelessness and crisis issues, then what kind of stimulation are those children getting? And then how is that going to shape their ability to learn going forward and hopefully breaking that cycle of poverty? You know, it can compromise public safety, doesn't have to. And, you know, 4% of the entire population that go to the intervention center, that's a small population, but that is something to consider because I think the stigma that goes along with it, we are afraid of those people. To break down within our community, you know, and even Dr. Desmond said, you know, he mentioned the NIMBY, not in my backyard. We don't want those people around by us, which then can impact some zoning issues that we struggle with. It strains our social service system. You know, it's a few organizations that are working really hard to help address a community-wide issue. And then lastly, it perpetuates stigma. The only way we're going to move this forward is if we break that stigma. Now, we know that housing and homelessness issues are not just occurring in St. Clair County. So we wanted to share this 3-minute video with you that actually comes from MSHDA and the campaign against homelessness. Just a minute, let's get this to play. Uh-oh.
Founded in 2006, the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness is a coalition of stakeholders across Michigan working collectively to ensure that homelessness is rare, brief, and one-time. The campaign firmly believes in housing as the most effective solution to end homelessness. The stakeholders of the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness include organizations providing housing and homeless services, state partners, philanthropic partners, persons with lived experience, and anyone who is engaged in or curious about ending homelessness in their community. Informed by listening sessions conducted across the state, the campaign identified 4 main strategies to advance the goal of ending homelessness throughout Michigan. 1. Increasing access to affordable and attainable housing for all Michiganders. 2. Using cross-sector collaboration to impact the other social determinants of health that lead to housing insecurity. 3. Enhancing the homeless service delivery system to better serve those in need. And 4. Increasing prevention and diversion efforts to mitigate the risk of becoming homeless. Through these strategies and collaborative efforts, the campaign is working to ensure homelessness becomes rare, brief, and one-time. To learn more about the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness, please visit michigan.gov/MCTEH.
I like what that says. Homeless should be rare, brief, and one time. Isn't that a great goal for us all to work towards? How will we get there? Well, we need to have a solution-driven table. And who needs to be at that table? Anyone and everyone. So not only our local governmental officials and our state officials and our federal officials, but people with lived experiences. We need to bring our realtors on board, as well as our landlords, public transportation to help with some of those barriers that may happen. Our law enforcement, our housing complex managers, that would be more willing to accept vouchers. Our medical community, our economic development administration, faith-based, nonprofit organizations, community leaders, their schools, community foundations. So if you're a funder, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are just passionate about the issue, we want you to join us at our table. So in wrapping up, your support and commitment to helping address the housing and homeless crisis in St. Clair County is critical. How can you help? We all have tools that we can bring to the table. You might be able to give it your time and your talents. This is Thanksgiving season. Christmas is right around the corner. If you want to connect with the shelters and see about doing collections or making donations, but not just this time of year. We need it year round. Help with other solutions, food banks, sponsor food drives, whatever. The list is endless. Pay attention to our laws and our lawmakers and make your voice heard. If you disagree with something, advocate for policy changes, advocate for change and helping. And you are always welcome at the table of the Housing and Support Services Work Group. Resources in St. Clair County, if you are interested, the Housing and Support Services HARA, which is again a one-stop shop, Blue Water Community Action, phone number is right there. Blue Water Rescue Mission, Pathway Shelter, if you need, if you know someone who is a woman and or women with children, Blue Water Safe Horizons, and the Harbor. There's their numbers. Also, again, information and referrals. You can always call 211, call a HARA. And if you are tech savvy and want to visit our CSCB website, we have a help card, which has a plethora of agencies and organizations that can provide a variety of supports listed on that help card. And our CSCB website is www.cscbinfo.org. We will be posting this this PowerPoint out there, as well as the entire taping of today. So if you'd like to see that, again, and I don't want to listen to Dr. Desmond again, by all means, you may find it out there. We will also try and email the PowerPoint out to participants, but recognizing the size of it, you may have difficulty downloading it. Again, here's my contact information. If you have any questions, concerns, want more information, I can be of assistance at all. And or if you want to join the Housing and Support Services Work Group, please contact us. With that, that is the end of the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Amy and Melinda. That was a fantastic presentation. So much information that I think our community really needs to focus in on, and we know that we can solve this issue together as a community. I also want to give a shout out to Ann Austin from Michigan Works, who was instrumental in putting the PowerPoint together. So thank you, Ann, for that. So our next segment is a video featuring people in our community who are going to share their experience with being homeless. The video is Homelessness, My Experience. And I want to thank EBW TV for putting this presentation together. From RISA, sorry, not EBW TV, it was RISA. My mistake. Thank you.
To some, a home is a place to relax, spend time with the family, and make memories. Whether it is playing with the children, meeting new family members, or simply feeling safe and warm from the outside world, a home is a place of refuge for many. But what if you had no home? No place to feel safe? No place from the outside elements or danger? While it is difficult to compile an exact number of the homeless currently reside in St. Clair County, it is safe to say that the numbers could be in the hundreds with little relief in sight. With the efforts of the Housing and Support Services Work Group of the Community Service Coordinating Body of St. Clair County and other local agencies, efforts are underway to highlight the issue while coming up with solutions. Oftentimes, the stereotype of someone homeless is a drug user, alcoholic, gambler, or other form of self-abusive individual. But what we know now is that these stereotypes could not be further from the truth in many cases.
I was in a domestic violence relationship in Detroit with my youngest daughter's father, and that situation, I generally ran to that situation because I was homeless. And I said, okay, well, my daughter's father said, well, you can stay here with me. You two can stay here with me. And it became abusive while I was there. And I said, well, this, plus the house was in such disarray that it was a CPS incident waiting to happen. I said, you know what? One morning I woke up and I said, you know, I gotta do something because I don't want my daughter in this situation. And I ran to the neighborhood school. She didn't go to the school, but ran to the neighborhood school, said, hey, I need help. I'm in a domestic violence situation. And I believe the agency is called Southwest Solutions. I was transported there by the school police, me and my daughter, and they found us a shelter here in Port Huron. First, it was myself and my now 10-year-old daughter. It was a very nice domestic violence shelter because I myself have dealt with homelessness through my life since a child. My parents were on drugs, addicted to drugs, and we lost our first home before I ended up living with family members. The shelter here, it was really nice. It was a women and children's shelter, and I got to know the staff, and we had chores, that type of deal, which they prepare you to live once you do get housing of your own. And they helped us get housing, and the rest of my family moved, my spouse and our 3 children. And we've been here now since 2019.
Originated from Marine City. In 1984, I had my own body shop, Steve's Custom Collision. It caught on fire. It burnt down. My insurance company wouldn't pay to reestablish, and which caused me to lose my home that was in Algonac. So I ended up becoming homeless. I was driving my car. I got in a bad auto accident, and I spent 2.5 years in Detroit Medical Center. I was comatose, came out, went to rehab, lived with my mother at her house for a short period of time. Mom passes away. Siblings, brother and sister, didn't want nothing to do with taking care of younger brother. So I ended up moving on, lived in a porta potty for a while, got picked up, brought up to a homeless shelter here in Port Huron. Lived there for a prior time, then you have to leave. So I was living the streets. I had nowhere to go. Slept in the woods, slept in the park, slept wherever I could go. I was called on for trying to commit suicide and took me up to the hospital on 3 West. Spent 3-4 days there, and then a lady named Betty appeared and asked me if I was homeless, and I said, yeah. She goes, well, I got a place you can come stay for 90 days and we can help you out, try to get you a job, get you a home, work with you, and you'll have a place to live and 3 places, good meals, and see if you know, it's like I can get a life back. I'm kind of up on age. I mean, I might not look like it, but I'm 60, you know, it's a couple of years from retiring, really. And just to have 4 walls and a bed, my own kitchen, that's, to me, that's one of the best things.
I was adopted when I was 6 months old, and I was loved by my parents. We lived out in the country. We had a small farm. It was like an experience for me to go into the city and go to school. And I went and met a lady. I was 15, she was 27. Yeah, and so I married her too, and then, you know, I was a kid with 3 kids, and then I went into the blinds business. But that's where I got hit by a forklift truck. We were unloading semis, and we were unloading in them one day, and somebody wasn't paying attention, and they just run over me with a forklift truck from behind, and it messed up my legs really badly. And I was, you know, employed. I wasn't like working a side job. And workman's comp, I always thought their function was to rehabilitate you and put you back to work. But 4 months into it, when they started talking about surgeries, well, the check stopped, the lawyers were called, and, you know, it just turned to poop, you know. Well, within a year, you know, I lasted about a year, but that was my first time homeless. You know, it took me a long time to heal up, but eventually I did. And then I started getting Social Security disability, you know, but it's very little, you know, amount of money. I wasn't used to, you know, managing that little of amount and then having to pay rent. And it was, you know, mostly my fault. I was homeless probably like 6 times here in Port Huron, or maybe more. I can manage it now, somewhat. I got my retirement because I turned 62, so I got that to give me a little bit of extra money. I haven't developed friendships too much in Port Huron. I was an employee at the soup kitchen, and I was an employee at Port of Hopes. And, you know, a lot of the people, you know, you can't be friends with. You know, one, because you work there, you know, you're not supposed to have outside relationships. And people at like the Port of Hopes and soup kitchen, they're always talking about Blue Water Community Action Agency. Oh, that's just crap. You know, it takes 1.5 years, you know, to get a house, even if you're going to get one. Ann Sherlink referred me to Roxanne Coleman, and Roxanne filled out so much paperwork. With her help and all this stuff she had me do, and directions, and I mean, paperwork like that thick, man. And she's sitting behind the desk. We spent hours, you know, just me answering questions. And I got approved for the permanent supportive housing. And she never told me how much, you know, they were going to pay, and then how much I had to pay. And I think my first payment was like $94 or something. I got a beautiful place. You know, it's got wood floors, it's got high ceilings. If somebody really wants to get out of homelessness, you just have to do what's necessary. The resources are available. You know, Blue Water Community Action Agency is just great. You know, I've got a lot of little hobbies, you know, going on, and life is good.
It all started when a tree fell on our house. 70-mile-per-hour wind, 70 or 80-foot tree, and it had been cracking for a long time, and we tried fixing it ourselves. And of course, it cracked above where we fixed. And when 70 mile, it went on my house. I had people go up and check for us, and they said, "Oh, you only got one hole." Then it turned out I eventually had 18 holes. And any time it would rain, I'd have to, at one time I did 28 times, and it got to where I despised rain. You even had it while you're sitting on your toilet. Look, look, look. I had one, if I wouldn't have looked up, she would have tore my head off. But I could hear them up there fighting all the time. And the police had to come and tase it and get it out, or she'd come back. And I only could fill it with plastic bags, and you could see him walking on the plastic bags. So bad I can't sleep without a light on. I gotta have a light on to see the ceiling. I have to. 8 years we lived that way. We had no water, no heat. I had a refrigerator that mice lived in, and I opened the door and I seen 2 of them giving birth to babies. So we used our spare room that was so cold to keep food, but it didn't keep. Nobody would help us. Had to go bathroom in bags because we didn't have water. I don't know if you've ever changed a bag after you go bathroom, but I don't care how much you check it, it still leaks. And when you don't have water to clean yourself, it's disgusting. And I ended up selling the house, and I got little or nothing, and I used that to live at a motel. Once I sold the house, which was August 6th of last year, he was in a nursing home, and I was the one with 3 cats living in a car. Even they hated it. I don't know, having cat litter and they go bathroom, it's really nice to have that in your car. But we end up being in the car 3 or 4 different times. You could just have the car running so long, you have to turn it off, on. You eventually mess your car up, and every part of you aches, and below zero, blowing winds, drifting snow, freezing rain. I got a bunch of paperwork, and I filled it all out, and I sent it in, and I got a phone call from a very sweet person. She worked with me through everything, and I told her at the time I had 3 cats, and she said, "I don't know about that. I'll see, I'll try," and went from there. I eventually had to get rid of 2 cats, and I got 1 now. And she was sweet enough to let me keep the 1. Sounds silly, but at first I played with the toilet just to see it go down. To take a shower here, I didn't want it to end. Being here, and thanks to Aaron, it's touched me so much that, I mean, for the first days we were here, all I did was cry. I didn't think this would ever happen. I thought we'd end up dying in our car from the cold, and to be able to turn the heat on when you want, and turn the air conditioning, it's just, she doesn't even realize, I can't express it in words how touched. I mean, I didn't think it would happen.
Typical youth. Matter of fact, I was working in Motor City Casino because my former life I used to be a cook, making good money and stuff, and somehow, it started out with just drinking and alcohol and partying, and then, you know how you get caught up in the street life, well, I can say, and you start doing more partying, and then, it stopped being recreational. It started becoming a lifestyle. I was living out of my van and streets, and I was using my van to scrap metal and stuff. And that was my wake-up call there. One day, I was riding around in my van with these fake plates, the paper plates you buy, and the police stopped me. I was going to a scrapyard, and I got all this scrap money, metal in the car, and it looked like a whole bunch of stuff because all the stuff I owned was in the van too. So he pulled me out, he took a picture. I'm finna go to jail, but he said, I said, you know what? I could take you to jail. I said, man, I'm finna go to treatment. I promise you, you ain't gonna see me no more. And he said, if I can see you again, I'm gonna take you to jail. And that was my, that wasn't the first wake-up call, because I had other wake-up calls already. You know how you want to stop, but you don't know how to stop. So I had been homeless. I've been, been in institutions. So the last thing I had left was death. I didn't want to go back to Detroit because that's where all my issues was at. So they told me about Port Huron. They had 3-quarter houses. And I went up there to visit, and I saw over there by the houses. They was under the Blue Water Bridge, and that site was so beautiful. The water was calming. I said, oh, I love this place. I'm going to come up here. I decided to go to treatment, and I ended up going to Sacred Heart, And it got to that point where if they had told me to look at a wall for 8 hours, I would have did it, because that's how much I wanted to, change for the way I was living. So after leaving Sacred Heart, I met a lady named Marsha. She owned a 3-quarter house. But I was staying there, and what happened was she took me on consignment that, when I get a job, I would be able to pay her. But so happened when I got up here, couldn't find a job. So, instead of me having to owe them money, they told me, I went and checked out the shelter that was across the street, and they told me they had a spot for me, and I went to, went to stay over there. They had life skill classes and stuff, and I met this lady named Julie and Vonda and Andy, and I had told them before, I was going to school before to be an architect. Well, you're having trouble finding a job, why don't you go back to school? Because she said, well, some things, if anything, you can live off your student loans or whatever, and So I took their advice, went back to school. Through the program there, I ended up getting a housing choice voucher. It's like Section 8, but it's for the homeless. And I mean, it started there where my life started changing. When I started going back to school, I was in AANA. I followed direction when they was telling me. And when I decided to go back to school, that's what made me decide to go back into human services, because when I got here, all these different agencies was, trying to help me. And I remember when I was younger, when our house caught on fire, how the Red Cross came, and, that was like a sign to me, like, you know what, I want to give back what somebody had freely gave to me. And so that's the reason why I went back into human services. Just knowing that you're giving somebody hope, that's changing somebody's life. Even if it's just making somebody smile, you can change somebody's day. And, that makes you, that's God's work. And I love doing God's work, changing somebody's life for the better.
There are just as many stories of how someone can become homeless as there are the homeless individuals themselves. But the question that needs to be asked is not why are they homeless, but how can they be helped? The individuals you have seen today are just a few of those who have worked with community programs to regain their stability as well as their pride. and why they found help, there are still many more who need assistance. With the hard work of groups such as the Housing and Support Services Work Group of the Community Services Coordinating Body of St. Clair County, help is being given and questions are being answered. But one group cannot do it alone. But you can be part of the solution by simply reaching out to any of the organizations mentioned in this film, becoming an instrument of change. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, everybody, for bearing with us while we change into our fourth and final segment. We're going to end our housing summit with a community panel discussion. The discussion was taped on November 7th by EBW TV. So we want to thank them for putting this piece together. The community panel members include Mr. James Freed, Mr. Brent Gillette, Melinda Johnson, and Mr. James Dewey. Michael McCartan is the moderator for this discussion.
Welcome. Today we're going to have a panel of experts discussing housing solutions in the Port Huron and St. Clair County area. I want to give special recognition and thanks to the Coordinating Services Coordinating Body, who actually is the overall sponsor of this, and its work group headed up by Kathy Swantek and staffed by Amy Smith. I'd also like to extend our gratitude to EBW and to the RISA for making these facilities available. We have a panel of experts and we will get right to them.
I'm Melinda Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Blue Water Community Action.
My name is James Freed. I'm the City Manager and the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Port Huron, Michigan.
I am Jim Dewey, the Executive Director of the Port Huron, Marysville, St. Clair, and Algonac Housing Commissions.
Hi, I'm Brent Gillette. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of United Way of St. Clair County.
Welcome to all of you, and I'm Mike McCartan, your moderator. We will have, in the interest of transparency, I know some of you have seen some questions and we'll focus on those, but I would encourage you, as you wish to jump in and add on to or amend the answers that somebody else had, feel free to do that. I would ask, given that we're on a time clock, that you are courteous of the time that's allowed to all of the panel members. With that, I'll begin with you, Melinda. During the pandemic, the federal government moved in and created some funds that were available related to housing and evictions in particular. Can you just give us a little backdrop of what that program was and what was intended to do and what it did do in our county?
Sure. Actually, we had a multitude of funds that came in through COVID that were mostly to prevent evictions and to assist those who are homeless. We had funding for other programs as well, but those were the two related to this. And from March 2020 until actually just through last September, we have spent about $7 million related on eviction diversion and keeping people housed and taking the homeless, especially in the first few months after COVID started, putting them in a temporary emergency shelter so that we could make sure that everybody was safe. One of the things we found with the homeless was that many of them who we'd never seen before, they couldn't get anything anywhere. There was no restaurants open, there was nowhere to go to the restroom, there was nowhere to take a shower, there was nowhere to take pop bottles back, there were nowhere to collect pop bottles. So a lot of them came out that we had never met or seen before. And then we had others as well. So we started with that. And then by fall of 2020, we had money coming in for an eviction diversion program. So we served, since March of 2020, a little over 1,000 people with that $7 million taken care of, making sure they didn't get evicted and that they had somewhere to stay.
James, the city of Port Huron being the largest area population-wise in the county, what was the pandemic like as it related to housing and homelessness, and what was your experience as a city?
So, you're going through it at the time, and it exposes issues that otherwise you would never think about. As she mentioned, where do they get their income? Normally they'd go to a restroom that was at a restaurant someplace. So what we saw was the most vulnerable become more vulnerable, and then our ability to react to that was actually pretty hamstrung, and so it was a difficult position for us to be in.
And Jim, you have a kind of a particular niche in the county as it relates to housing. Did you feel any impact of either the federal dollars that came in or just the nature of the pandemic itself?
Yeah, the nature of the pandemic, I think, was the biggest thing for our residents. We had about 10% of our public housing residents use the programs in order to continue to pay their rent because they were falling behind. Because what we find is our residents have such a low income. Many times they're getting a little help from family members, mom, dad. And we found that many times mom and dad didn't make it through the COVID. And so they lost a source of their income. And it really hurt them for trying to decide, do I put gas in my car so I can get to work, or do I pay my rent so I have a house over my head? And so we had to work with them a lot and do a lot of education with our residents so that they can understand the priorities and tell them that we're there to help them and help them get through that time.
Now, you're not a landlord, but you are sort of a quasi-landlord in terms of there's a side of the business that needs to pay for itself, and it's based on how did you balance that?
Well, for us, we're subsidized through the federal government. So if all of our rents went to zero one year, the federal government will pay us the following year the difference between. Okay, so it balances out over time. But that initial year, when we all started getting a lot lower rents because people quit jobs because they were going home to stay with their kids who are out of school now and try to educate their kids, the income dropped a lot. So the federal government through HUD actually gave us some extra dollars to help sustain ourselves during that time.
Okay.
If I could add as well, not just the immediate shelter and the housing costs, but we experienced with COVID was the utilities, with water and sewer. So people lost their source of income, they'd become delinquent in their water and sewer, and so we were put in the terrible position of, do we actually turn off people's water in the middle of a global pandemic so they can't wash their hands, they can't disinfect their homes? And so a lot of the federal funds we went towards utility relief. taking care of delinquent water bills. If you were on a bridge card or received SNAP benefits, you were almost automatically got your bills taken care of, which was kind of a step forward for a lot of people who had revolving balances, were able to kind of get cleaned up the books and get a fresh start. But it was a difficult, precarious position we were in because legally, under statute, we have to shut off water for a certain period of time. Of course, we didn't do that. I think the law doesn't speak to a global pandemic, so we intentionally violated our own law and didn't turn people off. That was the human thing to do, maybe not the bureaucratic thing to do. But yeah, the utilities were a huge component as well.
And Brent, you have probably more of a county-wide perspective, given that United Way is involved in every community in the county. Did you see, or have you seen, was there a difference between, the experiences in Port Huron versus the experiences in Algonac or Capac?
No, it was pretty universal across the whole county. Where we dealt with more of what we consider the ALICE report folks, ALICE threshold folks, which are what we consider the working poor. Those that are working every day, 1 and 2 jobs, trying to make ends meet, and sometimes at the end of the month it doesn't quite make it. And during the pandemic, it was a shock for a lot of them because their businesses closed without any warning, without any preparation, and so on. And a lot of them don't qualify for DHHS, so they weren't into that area to where they had some cushion or comfort. So they needed to come to whatever was available to kind of bridge the gaps for them. And we've seen 2 types. We've seen those that were very fiscal responsible and we're looking at how they can kind of keep things going, and then some that kind of dealt it with more like a windfall, which created a bigger problem down the road, kind of kicked the can down the road and made those bills, whether it's utility bills or housing, much bigger than what they could even fathom to clean up.
So we are down the road. Pandemic has subsided. The federal programs are getting less and less. So where are we now? Linda?
Well, I mean, one of the great things when we were paying out all that money was, first, we kept everybody housed. Landlords got paid. Some of them were they were thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that hadn't been paid to them by various tenants, and they were mostly made whole. The court system got a reprieve while we were in the moratorium, but at this point, I checked this morning, and our phone calls for evictions are up about 70%, and our homeless are up about 50% right now. So definitely we're seeing both those phone calls coming in now, where they had gone down for most of this last 2.5 year period. So we're seeing that, and that's an issue. The courts are having to go back and deal with all those. One of the things that we were able to do during the pandemic was provide legal aid to a lot of the folks who were going through the issues related to evictions. And most people who are getting an eviction don't get an attorney. And one of the things we'd like to see is somehow providing attorneys or attorney options for folks who are having that difficulty, because usually if they have an attorney, about 80% of the time they end up not being evicted. They work out a deal. So that's one of the things we're seeing is those numbers are starting to go up, and we don't have the funding, a lot of funding. We have a little bit left through probably about the end of this year. And then we have some money for case management to help starting next year. And we do it now, but that's all we'll have left for next year is some case management and some other odds and ends of money to help through the year. So big concern about what's going to happen related to that. I know that support systems is something Jim and I have talked about, is that a lot of folks just need some extra supports to help get them through and make sure they can pay all their bills and those kinds of things. And we'll have some money to help some folks, but I think it's a bigger problem.
So James, typically in St. Clair County, when the county catches a cold, Port Huron gets the flu.
Yep.
Is the impact of this, kind of pulling back, getting back to the pre-COVID reality of you got to pay your bills kind of thing?
So emerging from COVID, as we jettison the effects of COVID, it brought a whole new host of issues. So during COVID, a lot of folks who could retire or could leave the workforce did choose to leave the workforce. A lot of those folks were in-home daycare. We've lost about 800 childcare spots in the county. Now, whether that's a formal daycare facility or whether that's a lady at home who watches 2 kids during the day, those were still childcare. And so for those ALICE workers who are at that level, they can't afford childcare. So maybe they've had to leave the workforce because they have no one to watch their kids. We've lost about 1 in 5 small businesses in the state of Michigan. Now they are facing a worker shortage. And so now we have businesses that are closing, especially on that lesser skilled level worker that they can't find. And so really now we have a whole new host of issues of the lack of childcare, the need for workers because so many people left the workforce and didn't return. That's placing really some new challenges on our small businesses and on our employers. Some are choosing to close, and that's affecting the income of these workers.
And I assume affecting the revenue of the city.
Our revenue, thankfully, has been stabilized because a large portion of our revenue is property taxes, but the income taxes we worry about because a lot of the stimulus funds was taxable, and so it maybe artificially propped our income up, and so we really don't know what the long-term effects are working. A lot of people are working from home now, so a lot of the people who commuted every day to Detroit are now back at home working, which created a huge fury in the housing market for larger homes or different homes, and people started buying all these homes, and the home prices in the city skyrocketed. I mean, candidly, I could not afford the home I live in if I had to buy it today, because it's up about $140,000 in the last 2 years. There's not, the Landlord Association will tell you that there's not vacancies in the city, and they'll brag about that. Well, the problem is that rises rent rates up, and with the city of Port Huron, we're a very diverse population economically, but we do have a large low to moderate income populations. And whereas my housing costs may represent about 15 to 20% of my income, for a lower income worker, housing costs represent 50 to 60% of their income. So as those rising costs of housing increase, it puts an undue burden on the ALICE worker and the lower to middle income worker. Those families are hurting a lot more than, say, I would. Couple that with inflationary issues, it's really causing a problem for folks, just people who, I had an apartment, I could afford an apartment, I could afford my food. I could say that 12 months ago, but now today I can't say that. And so we're seeing, because of this housing shortage, the markets raise a rate, and that's, again, disproportionately affecting those lower income workers.
Both of you, Brent and James, have used the term ALICE, so I'll show my ignorance. What does that mean?
Well, ALICE is a threshold for standard of living, and it allows them, for individuals or families to earn enough income just to stay level with what the cost of living is in the state of Michigan. It's not poverty, it's not poor, it's those that work every day and try to make ends meet, and there isn't enough at the end of the month to keep things going.
So it's a defined standard, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're asset limited, but they have an income, meaning I rent my apartment, I go to work every day, I pay my bills, I don't own a big house, I don't own an expensive car, but I'm getting by.
Yep.
It reminds me of something that you said probably 15 years ago. I don't remember everything you've ever said, but I do remember this. You were talking about a family in the city of Port Huron who were paying, I think at the time it was $1,300 a month or something for rent. 2-bedroom apartment, husband, wife, 2 kids, both working. If they would have been able to buy the house, the mortgage payment would have been, I think you said, like $500.
Yeah.
Yet there was not a bank that would lend to that family in that situation. Is that changed, or is that the same
Well,
today?
so the city has taken a couple strategic measures. There's the tactical, there's the short-term tactical and the broad-term strategy of what we've done. The short-term tactical, we implemented the rental moratorium to prevent new rentals, which what was happening, so for instance, that home I spoke of, it was a home that went into foreclosure. It was auctioned off on the courthouse steps. A landlord can go in with $27,000, buy it in cash. It needed very little work. And so the landlord, of course, bought the house for cash and was leasing it to that family for $1,300 a month. So it was the time period between a home goes into tax foreclosure When it gets auctioned off on the courthouse steps, there's no way a hardworking mom or dad can go get a loan application, get money, and make it to the courthouse steps and have a fair chance at a house. So what we did is we've been purchasing the tax foreclosed homes, and we put them into the custody of the Port Huron Housing Corporation, which is a nonprofit. It allows us to take those homes, do the necessary repairs using HUD funds, and then to sell them to a first-time home buyer or to a low to moderate income home buyer. The broad term strategy is we've done our Pioneer Home Buying Program. We helped 36 families last year receive down payment assistance. We offered up to $5,000 for down payment assistance. So not only will we secure the home and prevent it from immediately becoming a rental by slowing the roll of that process, by slowing that process down, it presents more opportunity for folks to get a chance at those homes. But then we offered the down payment assistance program, which we've now increased to $10,000 to account for rising costs. So we're both taking those properties that would have otherwise dropped into tax foreclosure but immediate rentals. We're pausing that process to give fair opportunity for folks to get a mortgage and to buy them in a traditional way, leveraging our HUD dollars to make the necessary repairs. We bring them to like new status. And the reason why we do that is if we can go in there, it's hard to get a construction loan. So if you buy a house and you use all the money you have for the down payment, and then 6 months later the furnace goes out, you're in a real tough spot. So what we do is we go in, we get the homes from tax foreclosure, we put the new furnace in, we put all the big ticket items, the windows, the hot water heater, things that would really sink the boat of a family if they went down. And then we give you the down payment assistance and we put those costs into the cost of the home. A lot of folks don't realize that some of these lower price point homes need some work. And so yeah, I can afford the mortgage, but I can't afford the cash to pay for the new furnace. But I can afford it if it was in the lifetime of the loan. So we've really taken some maneuvers both in the long-term strategy of slowing those homes into rentals, but also the tactical measures of, okay, how do you get that family over that barrier of a down payment or over that barrier of, just hold the house while I go get a mortgage for 3 weeks. So those are the short-term tactical maneuvers. And we've been successful. I mean, we're actually now, I think, close to 50 families a year. And there's statistics. We say we've given 50 grants, but those are moms and dads with kids who now have a forever home. They're building generational wealth through equity in that home. So it's the minutia of government that maybe isn't the most sexy thing to talk about, but really has a meaningful impact on the lives of our citizens.
Thank you. Melinda, just on that same point, before you get to yours, you have talked numerous times about income and percentage of income that ought to go to housing, or a cap really on the percentage that should go to housing if you're going to be viable. And you've also talked about the kind of wage that would need to be generated in order to create an income that 30% of which went to housing, you could still buy something. Talk to me about that.
So typically you want your housing costs to be at or below 30% of your total income. If your utilities are included, they take that up to 35%. So when James mentioned that he's paying less than the 30%, he's in a good range for how much he's paying. And he's correct. A lot of folks in our community are paying far more than that percentage. Some of them are paying 50, 60, 70, 80% of their income towards their housing costs. And so then they're just borrowing from Peter to pay Paul on a regular basis. So when Brent's talking about the Alice wages and Jim, we're talking about poverty, which is what I work with mostly at our place, is for a family for about $24,000, say. The Alice wage is about 200% of poverty usually, which is about $48,000 a year for a family of 4. That's a huge difference in how much money you can pay towards your housing costs. And that's where we need to make a difference. One of the things we talk about is we need living wage jobs in our community. I once joked with Dan Casey that I wasn't going to go celebrate any more places that came to our county when 90% of their positions were not living wage jobs. That I just told him, and he just kind of joked, but it's a serious situation, and it's tough, getting wages up there, although that's one of the side effects of the pandemic, and with the number of people who've left employment, it's a struggle. I mean, I don't know a single employer in our county that isn't struggling with employment issues right now. I know that the city is, the county, everybody is. And so that's tough. And so we're all kind of competing for this smaller pool of people to hire. And so we've had to raise our how much we're paying folks, but it's still not enough because, as James said, we're also dealing with landlords who are increasing their rents as well because the market has become so tight.
So it's a supply and demand kind of.
Absolutely.
And to build upon that, you really want to break the stigma of folks who struggle to pay their bills, right? So these are as the ALS population. These aren't people who just aren't working.
That's right.
These aren't the lazy people who just need to go out and get a job. These are people who are actively working, who are at these jobs that don't pay what they should pay, and then you have the market. So we saw supply and demand of workers as prices rise and inflation has risen and rent risen. There was a delay before wages. Wages are the last thing to rise. Well, now we're seeing jobs that paid $12 to $14 an hour 3 years ago are now at $18 to $22 an hour for the exact same jobs. You drive through the industrial park right now, and you can walk on a floor unskilled and make $20 an hour right now at jobs that were at 12 3 years ago. But that delay hurt a lot of people, and so I just, my mom and dad were the ones who robbed Peter to pay Paul every month, trying to get by. They were both working, but that skill level job doesn't pay the highest. I'm lucky to get an education and get out of that, but it is, you really want to break the stigma. These are people who are actively working. They're not just sitting on the sidelines doing nothing.
Well, it seems like a recipe for disaster that if you're paying, as you mentioned, 80% of your income for your housing, eventually something is going to catch up with you. And do they come to you? Is that
yeah,
what
normally,
happens?
and what's amazing to me is a lot of these families that are, like James said, squeaking by every month, don't even realize where they are when it comes to a standard of living. It takes that one incident, that one unfortunate circumstance that lets them know. And usually it's something like a furnace goes out, water heater will go out, car breaks down, one of those things that they rely on for everyday living. And it's beyond their reach. And that's when they finally come to the realization that they're not making a standard of living. And then where do you go? I don't qualify for state or federal funding. I don't qualify for a lot of the programs that are out there. So they come to organizations like ours that is there just for the generosity of folks in our community that says, I want to help. And we're able to leverage those dollars to make it happen for a lot of folks. The good thing about United Way is that we're connected with so many other organizations. We're able to collaborate and put things together to where it may not be one organization fixing the instance, the situation that's at hand. It's a collaboration of many organizations pulling resources together to make it happen.
Do you find at United Way that the percentage of the dollars that are collected that are going for housing-related issues has gone up over the last few years?
It sure has, and not only just for housing for the ALICE folks as well as our underprivileged folks, but also with those that are chronically having housing issues. Our chronic men and women that have not figured it out, that didn't get the tools, didn't get the financial literacy to know how to juggle their bills and so on. We see that even at a higher rate recently. And so it puts a bigger strain because we have to decide. There's only one pie of money out there that we've got to split up for all these instances, and this is just one of many concerns that are out there. And they seem to intertwine with each other as well. Sure. So we have to sit and sort them out. And sometimes we're dealing with somebody who don't know how to sort them out for themselves. I think Melinda talked about that, and that's that training that comes along with, we just don't pay the bill. We've got to teach them how to make it happen at the end of the month.
Mike, and to build upon that, a lot of the folks who need the resources the most are the least educated on what resources are available. So in the city of Port Huron, we use some of our entitlement money to do an emergency home repair fund. So in 2007 and 2018, we would, if you were a low-income person or elderly senior citizen and your furnace went out, we have a program to help repair that furnace using federal dollars. But we were giving money back to the feds because we couldn't give it away. Now there's two schools of thought. One, we didn't need the money, which I think is very not realistic. The second question is the people who need the money the most didn't know where to find it. That's why we launched in 2019 the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion to make sure that the people who needed these resources were educated about where these resources are and how to find the resources. I think that's why the Community Action Agency is so effective, because you can walk in and just say, here's my problem, and they're able to say, well, here's some solutions. And at the city, we're able to do the same thing, not to the degree at which Melinda and her folks can do, but educating folks on, your furnace broke, it's a really bad situation, but there could be help out there. Here's who to ask. And so I think that's why programs like this and educating people is really key, because we were giving federal money back because folks didn't know how to get it.
Jim, you serve a kind of a different niche, and everybody has a lens on an issue, and when you look through it from 4 different lenses, sometimes you come out with different perspectives on the other end. What's your perspective on housing and the folks that you serve or on your waiting lists? Or
Well, just listening to the panel talk during that last little bit there, number one, there's a housing shortage as far as anything affordable. I totally agree that the rents are extremely high. We have a Section 8 program where we provide someone with a voucher so they can go out and seek out a landlord to live someplace. They're actually turning those vouchers back to us saying, we can't even find a place here. So we expanded, our jurisdiction was St. Clair County, so we've expanded out now to 3 other counties so that we can serve other people with those vouchers, because it's so tight here. So we do know the need is there. We also know the need is here because the waiting list for both programs, public housing program, and that is very, very long. And as Brent said before, people, I'm getting emails 2 or 3 times a week saying, hey, I'm in trouble. I need housing now. They should have been thinking of that a year ago, 2 years ago, because that's how long the waiting list is. So we know there's not enough affordable housing in our area. And does that mean we should have more affordable housing in the city of Port Huron? I'm not sure about that. I think that's a question for James and his job. But I think strategically, some of it could be placed at different areas where I think we're coming down the road where we have people who don't want to have cars anymore and have the expensive cars. I think if we have some affordable housing in places where it's close to work, so that they can walk to work or ride their bike to work, because they can afford those things. Because we know with our families that we house, the average income is just under $15,000 a year. 15. So we were talking earlier about Alice, and I think we're talking about some other incomes levels here. You're talking about a family who they get a flat tire, and they don't know whether to get the tire fixed so they can continue to go to work or pay the rent. They can't do both. It's that simple when you're on that kind of income. And they're still paying us 30% of their wage towards their rent. So if at $15,000, they're paying me about $375 a month rent. So, because that's where HUD mandates it at 30%, and that's, as Melinda said, that is kind of where it's earmarked to be.
we've used the term affordable housing, and every time I hear it, I kind of hear something different. And so maybe you all have a perspective on affordable housing for person A is different than for person B than for person C. Who are those groups, and what does affordable housing mean to, I'll start with you, Melinda, because you serve people in poverty. What does that term mean for somebody who's in poverty?
So for affordable housing, you're right. It does depend on the person, how much money they have coming in, what's affordable. Because, even 30%, and you're still paying $325 a month, that still doesn't leave you very much money for the rest of the month compared to what somebody else might be making with a higher income. So one of the things we're looking at is for those folks who have the lowest income is subsidized housing so that they can get some assistance with that. So places like Jim has, there's Section 8 and other similar programs to that. We've been overseeing some of those for the last couple of years through COVID, and we're experiencing the exact same thing Jim has seen. People get their voucher to go find a place, and they're losing them because there's no place for them to go. So that's a issue that we're seeing all over the place. So having the subsidized housing is what the lowest income people are looking for. We don't have enough in our county right now, and in the last year we lost well over 200 slots of subsidized housing with a couple of complexes that their income tax, is it low? Their income tax credit that from when they built the complex and stuff expired. And so then they sold the complexes, and others came in and they chose not to continue with the subsidized housing through there because they didn't have to anymore. And so we had over 200 people who were suddenly looking at having to pay far more than 30% of their income for housing. And there's been a huge scramble because of that, trying to help people find where they're going to go. That's a big number of subsidized housing to lose in one slot. So for us, that's mostly the population that we're looking at, is the lowest income of folks, in trying to find housing for those folks. So we're seeing a huge tightness in that.
There's also, what she brings up, it's a real tragedy when folks work really, really hard but can't afford to live in the community in which they work. That's a tragedy. What we're focused on at the city is we want folks who work in Port Huron to be able to raise their families, have good quality of life here. The shortage of the housing stock presents, although a huge challenge, does present a generational opportunity. We look around the state and we look around the country at communities that didn't have this conversation. And as they continue to develop, there wasn't a development that was equitable, right? So they got way down the pike, and now everything's unaffordable, everything's developed, and now you're looking back, gosh, 10 years ago, if we would have looked at mixed housing and mixed income housing, where would we have been? We're in that unique position now where we're growing. We have a very robust economy. We've had $500 million invested in Port Huron in the last 5 years alone, 3,000 new jobs created. All economic indicators are pointing in the right direction. 30-year historical low unemployments. The poverty rate has dropped every single year I've been city manager. It's now down more than 5%. So now we step back and say, okay, we're in a growing economy. There's a housing shortage, so now housing is going to be developed. And it is not a coincidence. We just announced a 60-unit missing middle housing development for the Connor Street. Those are middle-income folks who can buy a home using a MSHDA, it's going to be subsidized with the MSHDA grant, but it's a $13 million investment to make sure that the people who live and work in that neighborhood can afford to live there. It's intentional. We'll announce another one in the community on the north side here in the next 2 months probably. But really this is a great game of musical chairs. So when you have a housing shortage, we have folks who maybe could afford a higher end unit, but maybe there's not one available. So when we build a luxury condominium on the water, that frees up units that could go to folks who are lesser income. People are right now living in homes that are below their economic means because there's no other option. And so we've adopted the all above category of making sure we'll take missing middle, row housing, LIHTC projects through MSHDA, and then we want to mix. If you look at some of the lofts we've built downtown, yes, they're expensive, but some of those have been at part of their grant process, and they're using state funds, require them to do low to moderate income housing for the first 10 years or 6 years in certain cases. So that's helped make sure that those people have a place to live downtown. So, you talk about how affordable housing, I call it workforce housing. Affordable housing, again, has a stigma to it. Everyone wants, housing, and they want affordable housing, just not in my neighborhood. Well, that's the stigma. These people are working. These people are, doing the best they can to get ahead. These are the people you want. Because if you don't have affordable housing, you have a worker shortage, which is what's hurting our businesses now. And you look at other regions, if you look at Grand Traverse County, they have a significant worker shortage because there's no place to live. So the worker shortage that's hurting our businesses and workforce housing and affordable housing are interconnected. You can't solve one without solving the other. They have to be simultaneously addressed.
And I think that's important to have forums like this so we can talk about what affordable housing really means. Because it means something different for each income group. What we talk about affordable housing to the clients who come to my door is a little bit different than the middle income affordable housing.
What is middle income? Just so that I'm kind of in my head get a
80% annual median income. That's how I define it.
Yeah. And HUD has defined that for our area at $89,000 a year
for
a family.
A family of like
four. Family of four.
$89,000. So if I'm using your 30% number, 30% of 90 is 30. So that I shouldn't be spending more than $30,000 on my my home. Is that kind of correct?
Yes.
And what does that buy me? 30 grand? What price home can I get at 7.2% or whatever the current?
8.2.
8.2. Probably as we speak, it's going up. So, you know, what kind of a home does that $89,000 buy me on the current market?
Not a very big one. You know, it's a pretty modest home. Usually it's an older home in a very established neighborhood. Goes back to what James talked about. A lot of people are living in those because there's no other options, and so on. So it's kind of that domino effect of saying, okay, how do we afford that, or how do we? But I think it's more important just to have the conversation so people understand what the difference is between it. Because when you talk about affordable housing, it means something different to everyone. And I agree with James' analogy, not in my backyard. When you think about low-income housing and so on, that's not affordable housing for some folks. They need that subsidized housing. They need those units that are, you know, available to them. But we need to lighten up the load going uphill as well.
You're also seeing a generational shift. If you go drive down Garfield, go drive down Stone Street, look at the homes there. They're 1,100 to 1,300 square foot homes that were built in the 50s and 60s. There was a cultural change where we're building these McMansions, you know, 2,400, 3,000 square foot homes. You're now seeing a generational shift. I think COVID had a lot to do with it, where millennials and Gen Zers and Gen Xers are saying, wait a second, I don't want to be house poor in a 3,000 square foot home. I want that 1,100 to 1,200 square foot home. At $250 a square foot right now, which is what the going rate is, that's about $250,000, $200,000 for that price point home. Zoning in a lot of our communities around the county have made those types of home unobtainable. You can't build a house unless it's 1,800 square feet. We did the exact same mistake with the 10th Street development. We built the 10th Street development and required at least 1,700 square foot homes. And now we have to go back and amend those condo documents to drop that to 1,200 square foot homes because the builders are saying, nobody wants a home that big. You can't afford to build it. And so I think as a society, we're now looking back at what is the starter home? What is that home you can obtain to start your life and to start your family? And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's the thing we lack the most in the community, is that starter home, middle income home. And so we're kind of going back and looking at our zoning. Did the minimum setbacks for building a house, why do you need a lot 100 square feet, 100 feet wide? When back in the day, you only needed 50 or 75 square feet. The truth is, a lot of the unbuildable lots were homes that we took down as part of our blight elimination. We took down homes that literally couldn't be rebuilt under current zoning standards. Why was that? Those were great neighborhoods. Those were great homes. And so turning that self-reflection in on our administration, saying, okay, where did zoning go awry in the last 30 years that helped create the housing crisis? Because I think there's some meat on that bone.
Now, you reflect, obviously, the situation in Port Huron. Similar in Marysville, St. Clair, Algonac, the places that you have housing?
As far as affordability, yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, we know that Marysville has a brand new subdivision going up, and it's going very, very slowly at this point in time because the costs of, you know, people saying, hey, I would like to build a new home or have a brand new home, but the cost of the construction is so high that has really fizzled the project down to a turtle space. So it is very difficult. But if I could, I wanted to kind of jump off of what James was saying too, where, you know, a lot of times we've been talking so far about, you know, people who are working, you know, that, and I like to think about seniors. Our seniors become homeless as well, and they also have a great opportunity to have their homes turned over to new homes in our community, as they may move on into either a nursing home or into something else more affordable for them, because as James said, you know, that turns stock. And so, like, currently we're looking as a partner in a new development in Fort Gratiot, and it's going to be 90 apartments, affordable and moderate income. And you know, the biggest bonus for me I see there is it's going to open up maybe 50, 60 homes for people leaving their home that maybe live on, you know, Stone Street or Gratiot, as James said, that's going to be able to put a family in there because it's that. Because those seniors, they've lost their loved one. Maybe it's just Mrs. left or Mr. left. Their income is less. They can't take care of the home. Yes, the home's been paid off for probably 20 years, right? Just like my parents were paid off, but all of a sudden they can't do the furnace repairs anymore. They can't keep up with the blight. They can't do those things. So that's where they fall down and fall in trouble, and then they could possibly become homeless. And we opened a homeless shelter, transitional shelter, just a year ago for seniors only, and it's been extremely successful. We've had, I think, 7 people through there now, and before we could get them in support of permanent housing. And the need is there, even for our seniors, so I don't want to forget about them either.
So I'm getting depressed. We've had the what, which is the lack of housing. We've heard about the so what, what does that mean to folks? I ask the question, now what? From each of you. You know the situation better than anybody probably. Now what? And I'll start with Melinda.
So for our population, we've targeted that we're going to actively be seeking funding for case management services, those kinds of things, so that we can provide those services to try and help stabilize families who are not always stabilized with their income and other issues and barriers that cause them to lose their employment, lose their child care, whatever the case may be. And then the other thing we're looking at child care, and because right now, although we run Head Start, we just have very set hours through the school year. It's a school year program, 4 days a week, and we're looking at expanding that because that's been identified as a very huge problem in our county. And then what can we do as it relates to housing? So, James knows, I've said, hey, James, I found this grant, I'm forwarding it to you, here's the issue. Just trying to be more active ourselves within the county, making sure that, the city has a great Urban Pioneer program, but making sure that folks outside of the city know that there's a USDA Rural Communities program that can help with down payments and helping with those folks. We're switching and trying to make sure we provide home buyer education as well as mortgage foreclosure prevention services, and just really working on amping that up some more so that we can expand those programs and to create those situations and opportunities for people.
James?
Huge challenge, generational challenge. This is one of those generational challenges, but it also means generational opportunity for development. We are announcing large projects. We used to announce $1 million project. Now we're announcing $16 million housing projects, $14 million housing projects. It's really about adding stock and all of the above. I tell developers, what are you looking to get built? I'll take whatever you want to build. Whatever you want to build, please build it here. The mayor and council have been laser focused on this. They took $500,000 of ARP funds to secure the River District property. Then we use that land to leverage it to get a world-class capable developer in here who's focused on workforce housing. The WODA Group is a nationally recognized group that's done this, now announcing a $12 to $14 million project. We need more of that. Unique public-private partnerships. The missing component here, which has really set us apart as a region, is philanthropy. We have the Community Foundation of St. Clair County, which has been a key investor in some of these large projects. And so how do you it's an opportunity to bring government, developers, and philanthropy together to really pull off some of these larger projects, which will become challenging given the interest rates, the carry costs on some of these projects. It will change the model, but that'll make the necessity of those partnerships much more. And so having those, I always joke around, people call it conspiracy. We call it strategic planning. I am meeting with large employers in the city. I am meeting with the community college. I am meeting with philanthropy. I am meeting with the business people to talk about these issues because it affects all of them. And they all have a stake in solving this dilemma. And so it's strategic planning, strategic relationships that can really solve this. So this is a huge opportunity to, it's the fun part. We had the Great Recession. We had unfunded liabilities. I spent my first half of my career trying to dismantle a community. Now we're trying to build a community back. And so this is the fun part of governance. This is how we solve giant generational problems. But if we do it right, these are not just Port Huron's problems. This is not just St. Clair County's problems. This is a national issue. That doesn't mean we can't be the first to solve it. That doesn't mean we can't be the first to come to a conclusion on this problem. And so that's what we were the first ones in the state to solve the unfunded liability crisis. Now everyone's duplicating our model. We can be the ones that solve this as well. And we're probably ripe for it because we have the most collaborative acumen, I would say, anywhere else in the state right now. This doesn't happen. This doesn't happen elsewhere in the state. We don't get the blue meat screen of all the business leaders and government leaders getting together. That doesn't happen. And so the collaborative acumen we have here sets us apart, which probably it puts us in a unique position to solve the problem.
Jim?
There is not one single silver bullet to solve this problem. And as James really alluded to, is we have to come together like we are. We need to talk about it. We need to come up with all kinds of solutions from all over the place. HUD tried to solve this last year with all of the homelessness, and they said, hey guys, we're going to give you all these more vouchers, go out there and house all these people. Across the United States, and across the United States, my colleagues are saying, don't give me those vouchers. I have no place to put these people. Don't even give them to me. So you can't throw money at it either. You have to be strategic. I think it's a multitude of things, just like James said about the River District project. You know, that's a moderate income. We need to get some affordable income. You got to think about even, you know, higher income to keep your community vital. But that all frees up other opportunities for people in behind. So it's just, we have to look at it all together in programs. Programs. I've said it to Melinda before, don't give me somebody and then just expect them to be able to do it on their own. They just can't. We have to help them, walk them through the little things, budgeting, whatever it needs to be so they can be successful, because it's the most important thing is to have them become successful.
And I agree, I think, with what they all said, but I also think we need to kind of dismantle the stigma of what affordable housing is, and have the conversation about how do we integrate it all so that we have diversity, equity, and inclusion in every project that we put together in the community. And it becomes the norm, not a forced thought, but the norm that when I build, I've got to have a percentage of this and a percentage of that, and make sure that we're looking at the full community as a picture rather than individuals.
Thank you. We've come to the end. It was, I think maybe it was Jim, you that brought it up, that, you know, or maybe it was you, I don't recall. One of the reasons people don't receive the services they need is because they don't know where to go and ask for them. So one of the things at the end of this program will be, you know, who do I call kind of thing, because I'm sure, you know, no matter how many times we do it, there's still a need, and people say, oh, I didn't know that existed. So whatever those services are, I think it's important. You guys are a wonderful example of people coming together. And it was pointed out, this just doesn't happen around the state. So we're grateful to you. Thank you for your time, and we appreciate it.
Can I put in one more plug?
You may.
You said, where do I turn? Where do I go? There's 3 easy digits in our community that you can call. 211 is an organization that will have a clearinghouse and the database to federal, state, and local programs to be able to help direct folks in our community to services and service providers for whatever issue that they're dealing with.
So 211 is one of those numbers. Thank you all.
All righty. So I hope you enjoyed this, what I think was a very dynamic summit for our county. I want to thank all of the participants, because without you, we have no summit. And we are very grateful that you decided to spend your morning listening to what's going on in our county. Our intent was to do 4 things, I think: to share information, to stimulate discussion about our current housing issues or lack of, to create an impetus, to implement solutions, and most of all, to encourage involvement from all levels of our community. Human services providers have been providing services to get people housed over the last few decades, and we really need to have involvement of local officials, businesses, corporations, and foundations in order to address the issue of what I see after we've had this summit, the affordable housing needs in St. Clair County and in our cities here, because affordable housing, rental housing, as well as home-owned housing, I see as really on the top of the list, and everybody needs to get together. It takes a village to make sure that we can start addressing that issue. Thank you, everybody, for participating. As you can see, the resources in St. Clair County are on your screen. Jot those down, and they will also be included with this summit presentation. We will have that available for those who are interested in receiving it. And I also want to give a shout out to Sarah Hurley Tucker, who was our community relations staff person, that without her, this high-tech thing would not have happened. I'm serious. We would have totally botched it. So thank you, Sarah, so much for your time in doing that. And so that's it. I guess the ask that we have is that everybody on this summit, that participated and heard what's going on, to join groups that are working towards resolving the issue of housing insecurity in our community. Thank you very much. We're signing off, and please join the Housing and Support Services Work Group, because we continue to have a strategic plan to address the issues that we've talked about today. Thank you very much. Have a great day.